The private car pulled into the driveway just after 2 in the afternoon, tires crunching softly on the gravel. It was earlier than planned, much earlier. The trip to Seattle was supposed to last 3 more days, but a last-minute cancellation gave him an unexpected window, and on a whim, he decided to come home. Not for any grand reason, just because he missed his kids' voices, the smell of coffee in the kitchen, the way the afternoon light hit the oak tree in the backyard, things you don't notice when you're always rushing. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, suit jacket slung over his shoulder. The house was quiet, too quiet. No music from the kitchen radio, no hum of the vacuum, no clink of dishes being washed. That was odd. His housekeeper usually worked Tuesdays and Thursdays until 4. She'd been with the family for over 10 years, steady, dependable, the kind of person who remembered how his youngest liked his toast cut into triangles, and that his wife took her tea with exactly 1 sugar cube. He walked through the side door, setting his bag down in the mudroom. "Hello?" he called out, more out of habit than concern. No answer. He moved through the kitchen, glancing at the counters, spotless, as always. The dishwasher was running. A fresh bouquet of daisies sat in a vase by the window, petals still dewy. Everything was in order, too in order, like the house was holding its breath. Then he heard it, faint at first, like a whisper through a closed door. Piano music. Not a recording, live, soft, slow, and achingly tender. It wasn't anything he recognized, no Chopin, no pop song covered in a classical style. Just a simple melody, rising and falling like a quiet conversation. He followed the sound down the hall, past the dining room, toward the living room. His grand piano, a sleek black Steinway he'd bought more for show than use, sat in the bay window, sunlight glinting off its polished surface. And there, seated at the bench with her back to him, was his housekeeper. She was wearing her usual uniform, navy slacks, a crisp white blouse, hair pulled back in a neat bun. But her posture was different, relaxed, almost reverent. Her hands moved over the keys with a grace he'd never seen before. Not hurried, not mechanical, full of feeling. He stopped in the doorway, frozen. He'd never seen her near the piano. Never once. In all those years, she'd dusted around it, polished its surface, even covered it with a cloth when the sun got too strong. But she'd never touched the keys. He assumed she didn't know how. Maybe didn't even like classical music. But now, watching her, he realized how wrong he'd been. She played with her eyes closed, shoulders loose, fingers pressing into the keys like they belonged there. The music wasn't flashy. No fast runs or dramatic chords, just a few repeating phrases layered gently, like someone stitching together old memories. There was longing in it, and love, and something else, something that sounded like loss. He didn't move. Didn't speak. He just watched, heart pounding in a way it hadn't since his first big business pitch. She reached a quiet climax, a few higher notes that shimmered like light through rain, and then let the melody fade slowly, note by note, until the last one hung in the air like a held breath. Only then did she open her eyes, and that's when she saw him. Her hands jerked back from the keys as if burned. She stood so fast the piano bench scraped against the floor. Her face went pale. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled. "I didn't hear you come in." "I know I shouldn't have." "I wasn't supposed to. I'll go clean the upstairs right away." She started to step away, eyes downcast, already reaching to smooth her blouse like she could erase what just happened. "Wait," he said, softer than he intended. She froze. He took a step into the room. "You play beautifully." She looked up surprised, then quickly looked down again. "I haven't played in years. Not really, sometimes when the house is empty, I let myself sit for a few minutes. Just to remember." "Remember what?" She hesitated. How it felt to be more than just hands that clean. The words landed heavier than either of them expected. He didn't know what to say. For 10 years he'd seen her as part of the rhythm of the house, reliable, quiet, always there when needed. But he'd never asked about her life before this. Never wondered what dreams she'd tucked away to make room for survival. "Who taught you?" he asked. "My father," she said quietly. "Back home." He saved for 2 years to buy a second-hand keyboard. Said music was the one thing no one could take from you. He nodded slowly. "Do you still play often?" "Only when no one's here," she admitted. "It feels selfish, I guess. Like I'm borrowing something that isn't mine." He looked at the piano, his piano, and suddenly saw it differently, not as a status symbol, but as a silent witness to a secret life unfolding in the margins of his own. "You don't have to hide," he said. She gave a small, sad smile. "It's not about hiding, sir. It's about knowing your place." The words stung, though he knew she didn't mean them as an accusation. They were just truth, spoken gently from someone who'd spent a lifetime making herself small so others could feel big. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would fix the weight in the room. But all he managed was, "Play again sometime. When I'm here." She looked at him, eyes searching his face for mockery or pity. Finding neither, she gave a tiny nod. "I'll finish the laundry," she said, voice steadier now. As she walked past him toward the hallway, he noticed something he never had before. The slight wear on her shoes, the careful way she held her shoulders, the quiet dignity in every step. He stood alone in the living room, the echo of her music still hanging in the air. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed. Birds called, the wind rustled the trees. But inside, something had shifted. He hadn't come home to catch someone doing something wrong. He'd come home and accidentally witnessed something sacred, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like the real guest in his own house. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed long after the house had gone quiet, his wife breathing softly beside him, the digital clock ticking past midnight, but his mind kept circling back to the afternoon, the way her hands had moved over the keys, the quiet ache in that melody, the look in her eyes when she realized he'd seen her. Not shame, exactly. More like fear. Fear that she'd overstepped, that she'd taken something that didn't belong to her. He'd always thought of himself as a fair employer. Paid above market rate, offered health benefits, never raised his voice. He prided himself on treating his staff with respect. But now, lying in the dark, he wondered if respect was enough when you never really saw the person behind the role. The next morning, he skipped his usual pre-dawn emails. Instead, he made coffee. Real coffee, not the single-serve pods, and carried 2 mugs to the kitchen. She was already there, wiping down the counters, her movements efficient, practiced. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. "Morning," he said, setting a mug on the counter near her. She hesitated. "Thank you, sir. Please," he said, "just sit for a minute." She glanced at the clock. "I still have the upstairs windows to clean." "It can wait." She didn't move at first. Then slowly she set down her rag and sat at the small kitchen table, hands folded in her lap like she was in a job interview. He sat across from her. "I didn't mean to startle you yesterday." "You didn't," she said quickly. "I was just out of line." "You weren't," he said. "Music isn't against the rules." She gave a small, tired smile. "It's not about rules. It's about knowing what's yours and what isn't." He stirred his coffee, thinking. "You said your father taught you. Did you ever play for anyone else?" Her eyes softened. "When I was young, yes. I played in church. Once in a small recital at the community center back home. My children used to fall asleep to me playing lullabies on an old keyboard we kept in the corner of our apartment." "What happened?" he asked gently. She looked out the window at the garden she tended every spring. "Life happened. My husband got sick. Medical bills piled up. We moved here for work. The keyboard got sold. Then my son needed braces. My daughter wanted to go to college. There wasn't room for piano lessons or dreams when rent was due." He nodded. He knew about sacrifice. But his sacrifices had been choices. Late nights, missed birthdays, stress he could offset with a vacation or a new car. Hers had been survival. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Every day," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear. "Not the fame or the stage. Just the feeling. When your hands know what to do before your mind catches up. When the music isn't something you make, it's something you let through." He thought about that. "Why did you stop completely?" "I didn't," she admitted. "Just in secret. When the house is empty, 5 minutes here, 10 there, enough to keep the memory alive. But never enough to hope." He looked at her, really looked. Not as the woman who folded his laundry or scrubbed his floors, but as someone who once had a whole world inside her that no one ever asked about. "Would you play for me again?" he asked. She blinked. "Now?" "No, whenever you're ready. But not in secret. Not like you're stealing something. Like you're sharing it." She studied his face, searching for hidden meaning, for pity, for performance. Finding none, she gave a slow nod. "All right." Later that afternoon, he made sure the house was quiet. His wife took the kids to the park. He turned off his phone, closed his laptop, and sat in the living room. Not on the couch, but in a chair near the piano, like he would for a guest. When she came in, she didn't wear her uniform. Just simple slacks and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She sat at the bench, took a breath, and began. This time the music was fuller. Not louder, but more present. She played the same melody from yesterday, but now it had layers. Little flourishes in the left hand, a slight rubato in the phrasing that made it breathe like a living thing. He watched her fingers, how they curved over the keys, how her shoulders relaxed as the music took over. When she finished, she didn't jump up. She just sat quietly, hands resting on her lap. "That was yours, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded. "I made it up years ago, after my husband passed. It doesn't have a name." "It sounds like home," he said. She smiled faintly. "It is." They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warming the floor between them. "Why did you never tell anyone you played?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. "When you're in service, people don't expect you to have talents. They expect you to be useful. And if you start talking about music or art or dreams, they think you're not grateful for the work. Or worse, they think you're pretending to be something you're not." He felt a pang in his chest. "I never thought that. But you never asked," she said gently. Not as an accusation, just as fact. He had no answer to that. After she left to finish her shift, he walked over to the piano. He ran a hand over the smooth wood, imagining her sitting here for years, playing in stolen moments, keeping a part of herself alive in silence. That evening, over dinner, he told his wife what happened. She listened, eyes wide. "I had no idea," she said. "She's been with us since Lily was in diapers. I've never heard her hum, let alone play piano." "She's been here," he said, "but we haven't really seen her." His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Maybe it's not too late." He thought about that all night. The next day, he didn't go to his home office. Instead, he called the local community center, the one his kids used to attend summer camp at. He spoke to the director, a woman with a warm voice and a no-nonsense tone. "I'd like to sponsor a small recital," he said. "Nothing fancy. Just a room, a piano, and an audience of people who care." "For who?" she asked. "For someone who spent her life making space for others," he said. "Now it's her turn." He didn't tell his housekeeper right away. He wanted to be sure it would happen. But as he hung up the phone, he felt something shift inside him. Not guilt, but clarity. Wealth wasn't just about what you owned. It was about what you chose to notice. And for 10 years, he'd been blind to a whole person standing right in front of him. Now, he wanted to listen, not as a boss, but as a human being, and maybe, just maybe, help her remember that her music was never meant to be hidden. A week passed, and the house settled into a new kind of quiet, not the silence of routine, but something softer, like the air itself was listening. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way she hummed under her breath while folding towels. The careful way she arranged the fruit bowl so the ripest pieces were on top. The slight pause she took every time she walked past the piano, as if it called to her even when silent. One morning he found her in the garden, pruning the rose bushes with gloves that had seen better days. He walked over, holding 2 mugs of tea this time. Chamomile the way she liked it, though he'd only learned that by accident when his wife mentioned it in passing. She looked up, surprised. "You don't have to—" "I know," he said, handing her a mug. "But I wanted to." They stood side by side for a moment, steam curling into the cool air. Birds chirped in the trees. A breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the trellis. "You've kept this garden beautiful," he said. "It's not mine," she replied softly, "but I treat it like it is." That simple sentence stayed with him all day. Later, during her usual break, he asked if she'd play again. Not as a request, just an invitation. She agreed, and this time his wife and kids joined him in the living room. The children sat cross-legged on the rug, wide-eyed. His wife held a cup of tea, smiling gently. She played a different piece this time, something brighter with a lilting rhythm that reminded him of rain on tin roofs. When she finished, his youngest clapped without thinking. "That was like a story," the child said. She looked startled, then touched. "Thank you." Afterward, his wife walked with her to the kitchen. "You have a gift," she said. "You really do." The housekeeper shook her head. "It's just something I used to do." "No," his wife said firmly. It's something you still do. And it matters. That night at dinner, the kids wouldn't stop talking about the music. Can she play again tomorrow? His older child asked. I want to learn how to make songs like that. He watched his wife across the table. She gave him a look that said, see? The next day, he made a decision. He waited until she was finishing up in the dining room, carefully polishing the silver. He leaned against the doorframe. I've been thinking, he said. There's a small recital space at the community center. It's not fancy, just a room with a decent piano and folding chairs. But it's warm. And quiet. And full of people who love music. She stopped polishing. Sir, I'd like you to play there, he said. Not for money. Not for show, just because your music deserves to be heard by more than just these walls. Her eyes widened. Oh no, I couldn't. I haven't performed in 30 years. I'm not. You don't have to be perfect, he interrupted gently. You just have to be you. That's enough. She looked down at the silver in her hands, her expression torn between longing and fear. People will expect something grand, and I'm just a housekeeper. You're more than that, he said, and you always were. We just didn't take the time to see it. She didn't answer right away, but he saw the way her fingers tightened around the fork she was holding, like she was holding on to something fragile. I'll think about it, she said finally. He nodded. Take all the time you need. Over the next few days, he didn't push. He just made space. He left the living room empty during her shift. He tuned the piano himself, something he'd never done before, fumbling with the wrench and online tutorials until it sounded close enough. He even asked his kids to draw little cards with encouraging messages, which he slipped under her coffee mug one morning. Your music makes my heart happy. Please play more. She found them. He saw her reading them later, a small smile playing at her lips. Then, one rainy afternoon, she came to him in the study. I'll do it, she said, voice steady, but only if it's small. Just neighbors, friends, no press, no big crowd. Of course, he said, just people who care. He called the community center that evening. The director was thrilled. We'll handle everything, chairs, programs, even light refreshments. You just bring the music. As the date approached, something changed in the house. She walked with a little more ease. She laughed more with the kids. And when she played now, she didn't stop when someone entered the room. She kept going like she was finally allowed to take up space. He started recording her practice sessions, not to share, just to remember. He'd sit in the hallway sometimes, listening through the cracked door, marveling at how music could hold so much grief, joy, memory, hope, all in a few simple notes. One evening, as she was leaving, she turned to him. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't owe me anything. He thought for a long moment. Because for 10 years I saw your hands but not your heart. And your heart has been singing this whole time. I just didn't know how to listen. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Then she nodded as if that was answer enough. The week before the recital, his wife helped her find a simple dress. Navy blue, elegant but comfortable. His kids made a bouquet of garden flowers tied with ribbon. And he made sure the piano at the community center was tuned. The chairs arranged just so, and the front row reserved for her children, who were flying in from out of state just to hear her play. The night before, she came to the house one last time to practice. She played the piece she'd chosen, a blend of the melody from that first day and new phrases she'd written since. It was longer now, fuller, like a life finally being told. When she finished, the whole family stood in the doorway, silent, moved. She turned, surprised. I didn't know you were there. We wanted to hear it one more time, his wife said. Before you share it with the world, she smiled. A real unguarded smile. It's not for the world, she said. It's for the people who've walked with me. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't about giving her a stage. It was about returning something she'd never lost, just forgotten she was allowed to claim. The recital was tomorrow. But tonight, in this quiet house, she was already home. The community center smelled like old books, floor wax, and the faint sweetness of the lemon cookies someone had baked for the occasion. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a modest upright piano. Nothing like the grand Steinway at the house, but well cared for, its wood polished to a soft gleam. A small table by the door held programs printed on simple cream paper, each one bearing just a title. An evening of quiet music. No last name. No biography. Just an invitation to listen. She arrived an hour early, wearing the navy dress, hair neatly pinned back, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her children were already there, hugging her fiercely, whispering words of encouragement. One held her hand as she walked toward the piano, like she was a bride heading down an aisle. He stood near the back, not in the front row where he'd been offered a seat, but near the door, close enough to see, far enough to give her space. His wife and kids sat with her grown children, forming a small island of familiar faces in a sea of curious neighbors, friends from the local church, a few former co-workers, and even the retired music professor from down the street, who'd heard about the recital through the grapevine. She sat at the bench, adjusted the seat, placed her hands over the keys. For a long moment she didn't move, just breathed. Then softly she began. It wasn't the polished performance of a concert pianist. There were small hesitations, a slightly rushed phrase here and there, but none of that mattered, because what filled the room wasn't perfection, it was truth. She played the melody from that first afternoon, the one she'd kept hidden for years, but now it had grown. New passages wove through it, notes of gratitude, of sorrow, of quiet joy. In the middle she added a lullaby she used to sing to her children, transformed into piano, gentle and rocking like a cradle. Near the end, the music swelled, not with drama, but with release, like someone finally letting go of a breath they'd held for decades. In the third row, a woman wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. At the end of the aisle, a man who'd known her for years as the quiet one who cleans the Andersons' house, sat with his mouth slightly open, seeing her for the first time. Her daughter held her son's hand, tears streaming silently down her face. When the final note faded into silence, no one clapped right away. They just sat, holding the music inside them, not wanting to break the spell. Then slowly one person stood, then another. Soon the whole room was on its feet, not out of obligation but out of awe. She looked up, startled, eyes wide. She hadn't expected this. She'd prepared for polite applause, maybe a few kind words, not this wave of warmth rolling toward her like a tide. She stood, trembling slightly, and gave a small bow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying past the front row. Afterward, people didn't rush to leave. They lingered. A neighbor brought her a slice of cake. The retired music professor approached, eyes bright. "That last movement," he said, "the way you layered the harmonies, it was masterful. Have you ever considered teaching?" She blinked. "Me? Teach? Why not?" he said gently. "Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden, and there are so many kids in this town who'd give anything to learn from someone who plays with that kind of heart." She didn't answer right away, but she took his card. Later, as the room emptied, her children hugged her again. "Mom," her son said, "you were amazing. I forgot how much you used to play for us." "I never stopped," she said softly. "I just didn't have a place to do it out loud." He walked over then, not with grand gestures, but with a paper cup of tea, just how she liked it. "You gave us all a gift tonight," he said. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he saw no distance in her eyes. "No, sir, no formality, just gratitude and something deeper, trust." "I was scared," she admitted. "I thought people would think I was pretending, that I didn't belong up there." "You belonged more than anyone," he said, "because you played like it meant something." She smiled, and in that smile, he saw the woman she'd always been, not just the one who cleaned his house, but the one who carried music in her bones, who sacrificed her dreams so others could have theirs, who never stopped believing in beauty even when life got hard. On the drive home, the car was quiet. His kids were tired but happy. His wife reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did a good thing," she said. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "I just made space," but they both knew it was more than that. He'd seen her, and in a world that often looks past the people who keep things running, that kind of seeing is rare, powerful, healing. Back at the house, he walked her to the door. "Will you play again?" he asked. She nodded. "Not just for you, for me." The next week, she returned to the community center, not to clean, but to meet with the music professor. They talked about starting a small class for kids who couldn't afford lessons. "We'll call it Open Keys," she suggested, "because everyone deserves a chance to make music." He didn't fund it outright. He didn't need to. He simply offered the space, helped spread the word, and made sure the piano stayed tuned. The rest she built herself, and every Sunday afternoon, when the house was quiet, she'd sit at the Steinway and play, not in secret, not in shame, but openly, joyfully, like someone who finally remembered she was allowed to take up space in the world. The recital didn't change her life overnight, but it reminded her that her life had always been worth sharing. 2 years passed, and the house still stood on the same quiet street, sunlight still catching the oak tree in the backyard, the garden still blooming under careful hands. But something had shifted, not in the walls or the furniture, but in the air itself. It felt lighter, warmer, like the home had learned to breathe. She still came every Tuesday and Thursday, but now she didn't just clean. She taught. In the afternoons, when the kids were at school and the house was quiet, 2 or 3 neighborhood children would arrive with beginner keyboards or sheet music tucked under their arms. They'd sit at the dining table or on the living room rug, and she'd show them how to find middle C, how to count beats, how to listen not just with their ears but with their hearts. She called it music with feeling, and the kids, some from families struggling to make rent, others just curious, hung on every word. The grand piano in the living room was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a classroom, a sanctuary, a place where a shy 8-year-old played her first full song and burst into tears, where a boy with ADHD found focus in rhythm, where a girl who barely spoke at school sang along softly as her fingers found the right notes. He didn't interfere. He just made space. He'd leave the room when lessons began, sometimes sitting on the back porch with his coffee listening to the halting scales and sudden bursts of laughter. He'd started leaving sheet music on the piano bench, pieces he thought the kids might like or ones he remembered her mentioning. She never said thank you out loud, but he saw it in the way she'd glance at him sometimes, eyes soft with quiet understanding. One spring afternoon, he walked in to find her alone at the piano playing a new piece, more complex than before, with rolling arpeggios and a melody that soared like birds taking flight. She didn't stop when he entered. She just kept playing, and when she finished, she turned to him. "I wrote this for the kids," she said. "It's called Open Keys," he smiled. "It's beautiful. It's not perfect," she admitted. "But it's honest." "That's all it needs to be," he said. Later that week, the community center held its annual spring showcase. Dozens of students performed, violin, flute, voice. But when she walked on stage with 3 of her youngest students, the room fell into a different kind of silence. The children played a simple duet they'd practiced for months, their fingers small but sure. When they finished, the applause was warm, but what moved him most was the way she knelt beside them afterward, adjusting a crooked bow tie, whispering, "You were brave, and that's what matters." After the show, the retired music professor pulled him aside. "You know, she's changed more lives than she realizes," he said. "Not just the kids. Parents come to me saying their children are more patient, more focused, more kind, just from learning to listen to music." He nodded. "She's always been that kind of person. We just didn't see it until she played. Now, people in the neighborhood didn't call her the housekeeper. They called her Miss or teacher or simply by her first name, the one he'd only learned 2 years ago, after decades of calling her ma'am out of habit. At home, his own children had started taking lessons from her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. His youngest now practiced every evening, not for trophies, but because it makes my brain feel calm. His older child had even written a short piece for a school project called "The Woman Who Played in Secret." He'd read it aloud at dinner. She'd cried quietly into her napkin. One Sunday, as he sat reading on the porch, she came out with 2 mugs of tea. She didn't ask if he wanted one. She just handed it to him and sat in the chair beside him. They watched the sunset in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of shared moments, both spoken and unspoken. "You know," he said finally, "I used to think success was about building something big. A company, a name, a legacy." She looked at him, waiting. "Now I think it's about seeing people," he continued, "really seeing them, and giving them room to be who they are." She smiled. "You gave me that room?" "No," he said gently. "You walked into it." "I just left the door open." She didn't argue. She just sipped her tea, eyes on the horizon. A few months later, the local paper ran a small feature. "From housekeeper to teacher, how one woman's music is changing a community." There was a photo of her with her students, all smiling, hands on piano keys. She didn't seek it out, didn't post it online, but she kept the clipping in her wallet, tucked behind a picture of her children. He never mentioned it, but he framed a copy and hung it in the music room at the community center, right next to the schedule for open keys lessons. Years from now, when people asked him about his proudest achievement, he wouldn't talk about exits or valuations or headlines. He'd say, "I once came home early and saw someone playing piano in my living room. And in that moment I realized I'd been blind to a whole person standing right in front of me." He'd pause, then add, "Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't money or opportunity. It's attention. It's the chance to be seen." And in that quiet home, music still played, not as a secret, not as a performance, but as a daily act of belonging, because dignity isn't given with a paycheck. It's given with a listening ear, an open door, and the quiet courage to say, "I see you." And once you see someone, you can never unsee them again.